What's up, Barnhill family, and welcome back to your home for all things combat sports.
Yo.
So, guys, today we're going to do a deep dive on the rematch for the belt this time, Islam Makhachev versus Arman Tsarukyan. We're going to talk about how both guys have evolved as fighters, where both of their strengths lie right now, what to expect differently from this fight as compared to their first one, and then kind of end things on what to watch for, what's going to really be the key differentiators in this rematch to determine who's going to get their hand raised. And Nick, I really am excited to get into this one.
Me too.
Because this, to me, is the highest level mixed martial arts title fight that you could put on, certainly at 155. You have Islam, who's been the champion for a couple of years now, looks like a world beater, is really kind of dealing with everybody that's thrown his way. And Arman is showing that he is absolutely the rightful #1 contender. He's knocking off everybody you put in front of him, former champions. And since his loss to Islam has looked dang near perfect. I think these two guys, since they met each other, have a combined record of 18-1.
Insane.
So high level stuff. Let's start with the technical analysis. What do you think is going to be different about the way both of these guys fight this time as compared to the first time? And what are some things that we should be on the lookout for?
Well, this is going to be, in my opinion, an evolved rematch, right? We always talk about on this channel how the sport of MMA is evolving at this crazy rate. Even still, it doesn't seem to be slowing down. And then when you get these guys who come out right out of the gates into the UFC as a real problem in the division. Islam Makhachev came in, and people are like, okay, this is like Khabib's friend, but Khabib will tell you that he's even better than him. So you have this sort of hype that comes up behind you, and I feel like Arman and Islam both had a little bit of that. Arman's got derailed a little bit by Islam back in the day, but since then they've just been on this undeniable tear. And that's what's so interesting to me about this. They met years ago, Islam got his hand raised, but Arman has looked very, very good ever since then and has become the undeniable #1 contender. So this fight's going to be a lot different than the other one, not necessarily technique-wise or stylistically. I think there are mostly going to go in with the same game plans they went in with. Islam Makhachev, not only people can't go 25 minutes with him, but he's beating everybody, and they're not even getting rounds on him. They're not even hardly touching him. So his finishing ways have only gotten better since he's become the champion. And that might be the biggest difference in this fight. Is I think when they first fought, Islam wasn't as concerned about getting finishes as he was getting his hand raised. Now he's trying to put exclamation points on these finishes. He's like, look, you give me the best fighters in the world every single time, I'm going to go out there. Not only am I going to beat them up, they're not even going to go the full 25 minutes with me. And I think he wants to prove that to Arman. I think he wants to show Arman that, yes, you might have evolved like the sport of MMA, but nobody's moving at the rate that I'm moving at. And my team, my discipline, my game plan, everything that I'm doing with my camp is just working on a different level than everybody else's. And for me, I feel like Arman Tsarukyan is the kind of guy that if there's anybody in the division that can kind of spoil the party for Islam Makhachev and the Team Khabib guys, stylistically, it might be Arman, because he's got those very heavy, explosive shots that he likes to throw on his way for a blast double leg or a single leg, or he likes to close that distance with some strikes. And if you focus on the takedowns or defending the takedowns, those heavy shots are going to land on their target, which is usually thrown high. And that's how he gets his opponents guessing, where they don't know if he's going to shoot or if he's going to throw, but they have to be on vigilant and on the lookout for both. And when you have somebody worried about the takedown and worried about the big, powerful shots, you can really throw a wrench into their game plans and almost paralyze them a little bit. Now, for me, I don't think Islam Makhachev is going to be too deterred from wanting to engage either on the striking and definitely not in the grappling with Arman. But he is going to have to be a little bit cautious and calculated early on, because Arman is one of the more explosive strikers. And while he's not a Rafael Fiziev or he's not a Justin Gaethje as far as the striking goes, he hits really hard, and the threats of his takedowns and his pressure are what gives him the accuracy and the effectiveness of his striking.
Yeah, and if you look at this fight, it's really going to be a tale of who's evolved more since the first fight, because I think that the Arman Tsarukyan of today would have beaten the Islam Makhachev that he fought those years ago.
I agree.
However, he's not fighting the Islam Makhachev that he fought those years ago, and Islam, as you pointed out, he did come into the UFC with a lot of hype. A lot of that was justified, but it was also partly because he was part of Khabib's camp. He's his best friend, his main training partner.
Right.
Khabib wiped out the division and was quite dominant in doing so.
Right.
And so when you have a guy like Khabib saying, "Hey, this is my guy. He's just as good as I am. He's better in some aspects." And
he's my father's favorite student.
Exactly. Abdul Manap sang his praises prior to his passing.
Right.
You begin to really get excited about this fighter. But Islam has evolved into the exciting fighter that they all said that he was those years ago.
Right.
And he's doing things like submitting the submission aces. So, for example, Charles Oliveira, more submissions than anybody in UFC history. Islam submits him. Volkanovski, probably one of the most prolific strikers of the past 5 years. Islam knocks him out in the rematch. Islam has evolved his striking in ways that I think can't be understated.
For sure.
Because Volkanovski, yes, the fight was on short notice, but it's still Volkanovski. Right. You're not yet his cardio might be a little compromised. His body didn't look optically like it normally does when he comes into a fight, but none of that matters as far as his technical abilities. He's still Volkanovski in there, and he's still very dangerous on the feet. And Islam's counter striking and his shot selection to me have just improved so much that it's very impressive. Like, he's got beautiful ins and outs. He throws a check hook really well, as we saw him finish the fight against Volkanovski with a head kick. He times that perfectly. He's setting traps, which before he was using striking as a means to an end. He would use striking to get to the clinch, and then he'd work a lot of those judo trips, work against the cage, and then we all kind of know what happens when Islam takes you to the ground. It's rinse and repeat until he either wins a lopsided decision or he gets you out of there.
Right.
Now, with Arman, I think he's improved a lot with his striking as well.
Yes.
He was a guy that everybody knew was a great grappler, just like Makhachev. Extremely high-level wrestling, very good gas tank, almost like a Merab Dvalishvili of a heavier weight class. But his ones and twos have really come into their own lately, and he's throwing some really good combinations. And it's not just to set up the takedowns. That's his ultimate goal. That's both of these guys' ultimate goal, if we're being honest, is to get the fight to the ground, because that's where they excel. But they're also using striking as a serious tool to do damage and inflict damage on their opponents, and they're actually comfortable in a stand-up fight, whereas neither one of them were as comfortable in a stand-up fight years ago. Right. So Arman Tsarukyan, to me, needs to make this a bit of a chaotic fight.
Yeah.
I think that Islam is going to be very calculated. He's moving very well, bouncing back and forth in and out of range on the feet. If Arman can kind of make the stand-up portion of this fight a dog fight where he's just rushing in and throwing his shots and landing big shots on Islam, it's going to make it a little bit harder for Makhachev to get those clean setups that he wants, to get his clinch and off balance. Arman's a hard guy to take down to begin with. And so if Arman can make it harder for him to be taken down by using some blitzes and using some things that kind of rattle Makhachev, he may have some success on the feet. And he may actually set Islam up in a position where he's a bit off balance, he's a bit out of sorts, and he can get a takedown of his own. I believe he can take Islam down in this fight. And so that's going to be really interesting to me to see how the grappling plays out, because both of these guys are stellar grapplers, but both of their striking has improved. And one thing that we know, this is MMA, this is not wrestling, this is not judo. Striking is a major part in grappling success. Right. And so if you're winning the striking exchanges, you're probably going to have the advantage with the setups for your takedowns, because if you're the guy that's landing on the other guy, the opponent is starting to backtrack and move and scramble and have to get out of positions quickly. You're in a better position to implement your grappling offensive. And so that's what I'm really interested in seeing. I think the name of the game for Arman here is going to be make it a bit chaotic. And I think the name of the game for Islam is going to be patience, range, timing, and keeping this fight at the pace that he wants it and at the range that he wants it, and entering on his own terms.
Well, yeah, I love that you said that, and you make a lot of great points. One thing about the first pay-per-view of 2025 for me that sticks out is we've got Islam and Arman, and then the co-main event is Umar and Merab. Two Dagestani guys that are known very much for their wrestling, but in my opinion, if I'm just going to call it the way I see it, the Dagestani wrestlers in this situation are the superior strikers in both of these fights.
Yeah.
So I'm really interested to see who is going to go for these takedowns? Because yes, Umar and Islam know that they can get this fight to the ground if they need to. It's going to be hard to get Merab and Arman to the ground, but I believe these guys have the skills, like you said, with the clinch work, with the cage work, with the variety of ways they can get the fight to the ground, not just with singles and doubles, not just with ankle picks, but they're going to get really crafty. They've got the judo experience. They know what they're doing when it comes to the T position, body control. They understand all of that stuff. But I also feel like both of their opponents, in Arman and Merab, want to prove, okay, maybe these guys aren't the best wrestlers we've seen before. We just saw Aljamain Sterling go out there with Movsar Evloev, and everybody was like, oh man, I can't wait to see what happens in the wrestling. Well, Aljo got the better of that. I feel like Arman Tsarukyan and Merab Dvalishvili might want to go out there and prove to the Dagestanis, hey, it's not a gimme fight. You can't just take this to the ground. If you're going to beat me, you got to do it in a dogfight. You got to make it chaotic. It's going to be a crazy fight where there's going to be some striking exchanges. There's going to be some scrambling. There's going to be some groundwork, and all the groundwork's not going to go to you, Islam. I'm going to get some of my stuff too. And I believe we're going to see Arman Tsarukyan shoot for the first takedown. I think we see Arman Tsarukyan go to prove, even if he doesn't hold Islam down or keep him there for the round or anything like that. I think there's going to be a little bit of a mental battle and a wrestling battle that goes on to see who the superior wrestler is. And obviously you can't tell that in a mixed martial arts fight, but when it comes to wrestler versus wrestler, there's always this who's better, which country really are we going to represent as the best country for wrestling. And that's why I feel like we're going to see Arman Tsarukyan really try to push this fight to the ground. I think he wants to show the world Islam Makhachev fighting from his back, and we don't really see stuff like that happen. Almost never we see that position. So I think Arman Tsarukyan is really going to try to utilize those blitz strikes that he likes to throw. Usually it's hands. He'll throw some kicks from time to time, but mostly it's some hands to get your hands up to block your face, and then he's going to shoot in on the bottom. And he's got the explosivity, he's got the speed, and he's got the power to get people to the ground. I don't know if it's going to happen with Islam, but I'm very excited to see what happens.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, as we saw with Ilia Topuria and Max Holloway. Max Holloway is the guy that stands in the center of the canvas and points to the ground and makes you stand and trade with him. Right. And so what does a guy like Topuria, who wants to prove a point, do? He does that. He walks out to the middle of the cage, points to the ground, and makes the guy that does that regularly actually shy away from it. So I thought that was cool. And if there was a version of that for grappling, it would be Arman Tsarukyan trying to prove a point by getting the first takedown in the fight against Islam Makhachev, which I think he can get. Now, Islam and Arman are both superior grapplers compared to everybody in the division, but they do grapple a little bit differently. So here's what I'm gonna say are some key things to watch for. Watch, because Arman is going to get most of his grappling success changing levels after he strikes, shooting in and working singles and doubles, and transitioning to the back, maybe looking for a slam. And Islam is going to have his success getting in on you, working that clinch. Islam's a taller fighter. He'll be able to kind of snap down on the neck a little bit, off balance, and start to work his trips and more judo-specific type of throws. Not that Islam can't do a double leg, and not that Arman can't do trips. They both can do both, but the bread and butter for both is a little bit different. And so I think that watch for Islam to throw some knees up the middle and some uppercuts. When a wrestler is changing levels, a lot of times a good counter to that is an uppercut, is a knee. If you can hurt your opponent as they come in, then they start to think twice about doing it, and then those shots start to be a little bit more telegraphed. Now, for Islam, he's going to look to get in there, at his own time, get his pace, get his range, and then start to work his clinch work and off balancing from there. So for Arman, look for him to try to smother a bit. He's not going to want Islam to have the room, distance, and timing to work. If he can smother Islam, then he can kind of negate a lot of those and get Islam against the cage, actually, rather than be against the cage. Because one thing when you fight a fighter from Dagestan, whether it's Khabib, whether it's Islam, whether it's Umar, and yes, all three of those guys do things slightly differently, but they all have one thing in common: they're fantastic against the cage. So if Arman can flip the script a little bit and put Islam's back against the cage, that's going to be something really key to look for. Ultimately, this is not a video where we're going to make a prediction. That's going to come later as it gets a little bit closer to the fight. However, I could not be more excited about a title fight. 2025 is kicking off in a way that is massive, because for me, Umar versus Merab and Islam versus Arman are two of the highest skilled title fights, maybe the two highest skilled title fights that the UFC could put on, and they're on the same card.
100%. If Ilia Topuria was in either one of these fights, you can just go ahead and say this is the highest level mixed martial arts that we've ever seen to date. But either way, Umar, Merab, Arman, Islam, you can't get a better card than that. To start 2025, we're coming in hot.
Can't wait.